let's talk about what is, without a doubt, one of the biggest stories in medicine right now. It's a class of drugs that has absolutely exploded, going from a clinical tool to a full-blown cultural phenomenon. But what's the real story behind all the hype?
I mean, you really can't escape them, right? Their names are just everywhere. They're all over your social media feeds, they're the subject of dinner party conversations, and they all seem to promise a total revolution in how we think about weight.
And look, this isn't just a feeling or a vibe. The demand is absolutely overwhelming. As this research points out, the perfect storm of media hype and influencer marketing has been so intense, it's actually led to global shortages of these drugs.
So that's exactly what we're here to unpack. We're going to cut through the noise, look at the science, the data, and the real debates to give you a clear framework for understanding what's going on with this medical revolution.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll start with the science. How do they even work? Then we'll check out just how effective they are, cover the side effects, both common and serious, and then we'll wrap it all up with the big takeaway, the benefit versus the risk.
All right, let's dive right in. How do these things actually work? What are they really doing inside your body to cause such dramatic effects?
Okay, the fancy scientific name is GLP-1 receptor agonists. But don't worry about that. All you really need to know is that they're basically mimics. They're designed to copy the job of a hormone our bodies already make called GLP-1, which is a key player in managing our appetite and blood sugar.
So they pull off this magic trick in three main ways. First, they tell your pancreas to release insulin, but only when your blood sugar is high. Second, and this is a huge one for weight loss, they slow down how quickly your stomach empties. That makes you feel fuller for longer. And third, they tell your body to pump the brakes on glucagon, which is a hormone that raises blood sugar. It's a really clever, multi-pronged attack on your metabolism.
Okay, so that's the how. But the real question is, do they work? And just how well do they work? Let's look at what the clinical trials actually say.
Now this is where it gets really fascinating, because you can literally see the technology improving right before your eyes. The first-gen drugs, the monoagonists, they worked pretty well, but then scientists figured out how to target 2 or even 3 different hormone receptors at once. The results? They just got better and better. It turns out our body has a whole committee of hormones telling it that it's full, so the more of them you can activate, the stronger the signal. The trend here is undeniable. More targets, more weight loss.
And just to put a fine point on that, check out this number. One of the newest drugs, a triagonist, showed an average weight loss of 22.6 kilograms. I mean, that's just staggering. We're talking about numbers that, until very recently, you'd only ever see with major bariatric surgery.
And here's how some of the specific drug names you've probably heard about fit into this picture. You can see the older monoagonists showing solid results, but then you look at the newer dual and triagonists like tirzepatide and retatrutide, and they are just in a completely different league.
All right, but as we all know, there's no such thing as a free lunch. With effects this powerful, there's got to be another side of the coin, right? So let's talk about what some people call the price of admission, the common side effects.
The issues you'll hear about most often, by a long shot, are all about your gut. We're talking nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. These are very common, hitting a majority of people when they first start the medication. Now, the good news here is that for most, these symptoms depend on the dose, and they tend to get a lot better as your body gets used to the drug. Okay, so moving past those initial gut issues, there's another risk that's pretty well established in the data: gallbladder problems. Multiple big analyses of the clinical trials have found a really clear connection between these drugs and a higher risk of things like gallstones, especially when people are on higher doses for a longer time.
Okay, now we're getting to the real heart of the controversy. This is where we need to separate fact from fear, the real signal from all the noise. We've all seen the scary headlines about even more serious risks.
Yeah, you've probably seen the headlines. Pancreatitis, cancer, even suicidal thoughts. These are really serious concerns that have been raised. We're going to dive into what the evidence actually says for all of these.
But first, there's this other, more subtle debate that's popping up. What kind of weight are people actually losing? New research is showing that while yes, about 60% of it is fat, a pretty big chunk, around 40%, can come from lean body mass, and that includes your muscle. This has started a whole conversation about the risk of unhealthy muscle loss, or sarcopenia.
Okay, now let's tackle that really serious topic of suicidal thoughts, because it's the perfect example of why you see such confusing and contradictory headlines. The first alarms came from these things called spontaneous reporting systems, and they showed a potential link. But then, when scientists ran more rigorous studies, like randomized controlled trials and huge real-world studies, they just didn't find an increased risk compared to other drugs or a placebo. The reason the debate continues is that every single type of study has its own strengths and weaknesses.
And I really want to pause on this for a second, because understanding what these spontaneous reporting databases are is so important. Think of them like a smoke alarm. They are fantastic for picking up a potential signal, a whiff of smoke, that tells scientists, hey, maybe you should look over here. But they can't prove the drug caused the fire. They are the start of a scientific question, not the final answer.
And you know what? We see this exact same pattern when we look at the concerns around pancreatitis and cancer. The smoke alarm went off in those early reporting systems. But for the most part, when the big, controlled, real-world data studies went looking for the fire, they haven't found a statistically significant increased risk. Now, regulators are still watching this very closely, but the strongest evidence we have right now doesn't support a direct causal link.
All right, so after all of that, where do we land? What's the bottom line here? Let's zoom out and just look at the big picture, the balance of benefit versus risk.
It really all boils down to this one central tension. On the one hand, you have a tool that is delivering truly unprecedented, life-changing weight loss and health benefits for millions of people. On the other hand, you have very common GI side effects and a picture on rare but serious risks that is still coming into focus. Because these drugs are so new and being used by so many people, we are all learning about their long-term safety profile together, in real time.
Look, at the end of the day, the full story of these drugs is still being written. What we've talked about today should give you the tools to understand the science, to weigh the different kinds of evidence you see, and hopefully to see beyond the next viral headline. The question that hangs over all of this remains: are we witnessing a true medical miracle, or is the final, most important chapter on their risks still to come?